Baba knows the way. For Joseph Baba Ifa. Baba knows the way. We follow the signs. He walks with the Orisha through sacred lines. He speaks with the ancients. He honors the drum. He carries the wisdom where we all come from.
Hey family, thank you for tuning into Our Roots podcast with Joseph Baba Ifa. We're only the strongest roots see the light, brought to you by Obatalá Candles and more. And if you haven't had the opportunity, hit that subscribe button. Phil, what's up, brother?
What's going on, everybody?
What's going on?
Happy Sunday.
Happy Sunday.
Yes, sir, man. I'm happy to be here. Happy you guys are all here and ready to have a good day today.
Always a privilege. How are you feeling, sir?
I feel good, man. You know, I still do need a kidney.
Yep.
Still have stage 5, but I'm trucking along. Just finished with all of my last testing that I need to be done with Advent Health. So
Nice.
So now they're actually going to start contacting the people who have applied.
Very nice.
So yeah, so I am good to go. But you know what else is good to go? Our members.
Love it. Yeah. Shout out to the members. How are you guys?
Shout out to the members, and if you guys want to join our membership, it's really easy. All you have to do is click on the button that's directly under this video. It says join. It takes you to a place
Magical
place. Magic. Where we have 3 separate tiers. Each tier offers its own different set of perks. So make sure you get in on that right now.
Absolutely, brother. So yeah, and it's kidneyforphil.com, right?
Yes, kidneyforphil.com.
Absolutely, guys. Definitely spread awareness and whatnot. Phil is such a huge part of what we do here. And another thing we're going to be doing is making this video called Obatalá and Ori. So, you know, we've had great success with videos on both of these concepts. Obatalá being the Orisha, right? And Ori as far as the concept of the head and whatnot. But me and Erica, we were sitting down and we were going over the theme, and we just thought it would be a great video to come out with, to kind of talk about the correlation between the two. Like we did Ochung in Love and Chango, King of Kings, and, you know, we're kind of delving even more profoundly into each Orisha, and, you know, these two are basically attached at the hip or the neck, proverbially. So we're going to delve into all of the aspects of Ori that Obatalá has to do with, and the first one really goes back to the Odu Ifá, which is the King Odu and the first Odu, right? And a lot of people ask, you know, why is Obatalá so exalted, right? Why does he go on top of all the other Orishas? Why is he in this position? So it kind of goes back to Obatalá's inception, right? Obatalá's, you know, formal name is Orishanla, which means Orisha presented itself, or Orisha has arrived, or big Orisha, right? Because Obatalá was the first Orisha. He is seen as the personal extension of Olodumare from an Orisha standpoint. Just like Ori is the extension of Olodumare within each of us. That is our aspect of Orisha that can be activated, right? When you actually look at one of the euphemisms or liaisons for Ori, it's Eda or Eleda. So Eda means that which creates. So Eleda means that which carries, that which creates. So like, for example, in Cuba, you've always heard Ibori Eleda or Kio Bori Eleda, which means I'm going to make ebo or offerings to Ori as Eleda, as the house of creation, right, which is radicated in our head. And Obatalá was that first creation. So they kind of are extensions of each other. So that's, from the very beginning, you can start seeing the links between both of them. But as far as Obatalá being exalted to the point of apex position, practically synonymously with Ori, or being known as Olori Orisha, or the head of Orisha, it goes all the way back to Eyobe. Now, there's a famous story where the Meis were all invited to Olodumare's palace, or Olofing's palace, for a dinner that was going to put them each in the position from a seniorial standpoint to see who was going to be elder. And Eyobe was actually the youngest, so he really wasn't that motivated to go. I mean, it was a free meal, but other than that, he really wasn't interested. But he wanted things to go as well as they could for him. And, you know, he went for divination with Orumila. And when he did this, he was told to perform sacrifice at that moment. Now, this means he was going to end up late, which he wasn't trying to do, but, you know, it ended up that way due to his obedience to Ifá. So he performed the ebo, and, you know, all the other Meis were walking by, his older brothers, and laughing at him and jeering him. And, he took it on the chin and he did his work. And he ended up going to Olofin's palace, right? In some versions, it was Obatalá who was the Olofin at the moment, or the governor, right? And when he got there, he deposited his ebo in the garbage. And when he did that, the only thing he found left was the head of a fish. And, he could see that his brothers were eating already and this is what they had left. So he didn't want to go through the shame of having to eat it, in front of them and face even more ridicule. So, he started consuming the head of the fish. And Obatalá actually walked in and saw what had occurred. And he said, "Why are you eating that?" He said, "Well, that's the only thing that was left. No one touched it." And he said, "Well, being that you consumed the head of the fish, you shall be the head of Orisha," right? And, at that point, they dressed him in all white and whatnot, and they basically groomed him as a king, and they put him on top of a hill. Now, the other maids were sitting at the table. Eyobe was missing. They were like, "Man, this kid, he's just a knockaround guy," and they were kind of wondering, when way they were going to be awarded their position. Funmei or Oragun was seen as the one who was going to win or be given the seat of destiny based on just his position within the 16. Even though Ekumei was the oldest, Oragun was seen as the most powerful. So they were all sitting there, and Obatalá walked by and was like, "What are you guys waiting for?" And they were like, "We're waiting for you to crown one of us. We ate your food and, we're ready to go." And he was like, "I already crowned the King of Kings." And they were like, "Where?" He was like, "You can see him outside." And when they walked outside, they saw Eyobe at the top of the hill, dressed in all his regal paraphernalia and, in all white and things like that. And they were like, they had to bow, So when you interpret this story, it was the child of Obatalá, or Obatalá himself possibly, depending on how you interpret it, who was crowned first. The Odu Ifá speaks of why Obatalá may be actually the most affiliated Orisha to Ifá practice and priesthood other than Orunmila. Because of this, because it was through Obatalá and the appeasement to like Eshu, Obatalá and whatnot, that, Eyobe received this exalted position. But if you do interpret it as the son of Obatalá, who was actually crowned based on, his obedience to Ifá and performing the ebo at the adequate time, once again, it explains why Obatalá goes above all the other Orishas and is on par with Ori to a certain degree. So him being crowned on top of the hill, or Oke, right, which is another Orisha that's very associated with him based on Eyobe, as well as Ofumei, being that's where he was crowned. He reached that apex position and he became the head Orisha, right, or his children in that regard. So, that's where the correlation comes. And then when you go back as well to Eyobe, it speaks of when the Ori process first manifested, where Ori was rolling. It was just a head, and it was rolling, and it had no orientation, it had no guidance, it had no path. And the other Orishas were trying to assist it and help it fulfill its destiny and comply with it, but they were having a lot of difficulties because it was a very complex thing. So the head, under the advice of Eshu, who's actually one of the facilitators of the reparation of Ori, sent him to Orumila's house. He said, "Go visit the Babalao." So when Ori rolled onto the mat and it landed on its neck, basically, divination was performed. Eyobe was revealed, where Orumila identified the process to be able to, consecrate someone's Ori icon first manifested, and he took Ori through that process. And at that point, Ori basically exploded, or it exalted itself into the supreme position or apex position on the body. Because of that, till this day, when you salute a Babalawo, everyone touches the ground with their right hand. But the reason that occurs is because Ori said, "All of my children from this day forward will recognize Orumila, and pay respect to Orumila." And being that the Babalawos are the representants of Ifá priesthood on earth, it's a reiteration of that. But who actually ends up in that supreme position is Eshu, being that when we face downwards, or our forehead is faced to the ground, Ori is actually in the inferior position, and Ipako, the back of our head, who manifests through the Odu of Obeade, is in the supreme position. So even then, Eshu was like, "Yeah, you're great, but I'm even above you." So, and then when you look at the correlation as well, the head, Ori, Eyobe, Obatalá, it's an explanation as to why, Obatalá is seen as that supreme Orisha, ultimately, as far as position, right? Now, where they actually first really interacted, apart from the whole fish story and whatnot, is in the Odu of Obe or Obe Ori Ogunda, right? So when we get into our creation myth, not so much the divine biblical aspect, like when Obatalá came down on the chain and things like that, which is another reiteration as to why Obatalá is seen as the head Orisha or the first Orisha, because technically he was the first Orisha to actually touch the earth, So I guess we'll get into that before we get specifically in Obeyono, because it's an extension of Eyobe. So when Olodumare gave the divine mission to Obatalá, it was time for Obatalá to come down and whatnot. He performed divination, Ebo, all these different things to have a successful voyage or descension from heaven to earth. The whole famous story about the chain, when he got down there, it was a murky abyss, which was owned by Olokun at the time. Obatalá let go of the divine sand to be able to have a catalyst, to be able to spread landmass. And then apart from that, one of his animals, the first animals to actually touch earth, had all to do with Obatalá. The agemo, or the chameleon, was the first one. So when it landed on the earth, it did so in a very steady fashion because he was kind of nervous. He's like, okay, there's water, there's sand, I'm floating. So till this day, the chameleon walks in a very cautious fashion because he never really knows if the earth is sturdy or not. Then after that, he let go of the five-toed hen, right? Being that Obatalá preferably consumes feminine animals. When he let go of the hen in its hectic fashion started spreading the dirt with its feet, which ultimately became 30% of land mass. And then Obatalá went down to basically begin procreating amongst himself with his, faithful companion, the cat, as a friend, So all of those things lead into the creation of human beings, because Obatalá, once he arrived, it was time for him to begin his divine position, being the head Orisha, the father Orisha, the first Orisha, the exalted Orisha, to start constructing people. So there's two ways of looking at this. You have the famous story of, Obatalá beginning to mold people out of clay. And, basically he had to mold, I don't know how many people in the beginning, but it was a monumentous task. So he was working and molding people out of clay and things like that. He got tired, he got thirsty, he had some palm wine, and he became inebriated to the point where he started molding in an imperfect fashion. And due to his hangover, he told Olodumare that he was done, and Olodumare breathed Emi into everybody, or the life force, his divine daughter. And when that happened, people with deformities manifested for the first time. Obatalá never forgave himself to the point where he's never drunk palm wine ever again. It's one of his most strictest taboos. It's actually his first taboo. So Obatalá can consume liquor, just not palm juice or palm wine, right? But that's the first version, where Obatalá not only was the constructor of heads, but the constructor of the body. Now, from the toes to the neck. Now, there's other versions based on Oduduwa coming in and finishing the job, being that Obatalá was under the influence to that point, where he did it in conjunction with Ogun. Now, there's an interesting dynamic between Obatalá and Oduduwa, where technically, if you look at the Odu of Eyobe, the only two cases I've seen where an Orisha can go above Obatalá is the Odu of Eyobe, where it says that due to Obatalá's inebriation, he lost the position of Olofin Aye, or governor of earth, to Oduduwa, because Oduduwa had a much more strict personality. I mean, when you actually look at Obatalá, he was one of the most vicious Orishas. He was actually the first Orisha to ever delve into habits, whether it was narcotics, whether it was alcohol, whether it was anything. All of the vices on earth were taught to the other Orishas by Obatalá's example. So based on his indulgence in the palm wine, Oduduwa, living a much more stricter, cleaner lifestyle, picked up when Obatalá passed out and finished the job. And Olofin, or Olodumare, gave him the title of Olofin Aye, or Olofin Adimola, which he still has till this day. So Eyobe says that Oduduwa can go on top of Obatalá, right? And then the only other case I saw was in Irosun Sa, where Ochung, was feeling disregarded, especially by Obatalá, due to the fact that he was being a little arrogant based on his position. And it's interesting because there's another pataki that we're going to go over today in Osarosun that speaks of Obatala's position as well, which is the Contrabure, where Ochun said, okay, big Orisha, this, that, and the third, we're going to see how well things go when I take away all my blessings. And Ochun took away everything she provided. She took away money, love, happiness, everything, and everybody started feeling it to the point where they said, hey, let's give this lady what she wants. And Obatalá was like, I'm not giving up my supreme position to her. And they said, if you don't, we're going to die of misery here. So at least now you need to give her that homage. And Ochun went above Obatalá in the Chinero, in Irosun Sa. So it's one of the only two cases that I can recall where, you know, that happens. Now, obviously, if someone has their Ile Ori icon, it can go next to Orumila or it can go above everybody because Ori is literally God. So if you don't have your Ile Ori, get organized to receive it. Probably the most important thing you're going to receive besides Orumila and Eshu, and maybe crowning your guardian Orisha or performing Itefa. But the other version was where, based on Obatala's incompletion of his tasks, two gentlemen picked up the mission. Now, in some versions of our mythology, Ogun was a son of Odudua, right, with a very military or militant personality. So Odudua provided the clay, and they say that Ogun provided the iron, or eating, right? That's why men are known as Okunring and women are known as Obingring, right? Which means the anatomy was made out of iron. So they constructed it from the toes to the neck. Now, when we now go into the Odu of Obeyono, it speaks of a story where Obatalá, in his manifestation or path of Ajala or Ajala Moping, was addicted to gambling. It was one of Obatala's vices, and it was very prevalent as well in the Odu of Irosofun, where he basically gambled away the Santo money or stole the Santo money, and, you know, because of it, he had a heart attack, you know, based on divine retribution and karma. So when Obatalá got into this severe debt and he couldn't pay the bookie, you know, he went into hiding. Now, Ayala's job is to construct destinies out of clay. That's all he does. He constructs heads. And they're in this big warehouse type house type thing based on the mythology and scripture. So this was a serious issue because, you know, creation was basically stopping. The reincarnation process was stopping, all of these different things, and it was stunting the universe to the point where it could break the fabric of it. So Rumela, being productive, performed divination. And the Odu of Obeyono was revealed, where Ifá told him to perform sacrifice with 3 bags of salt, right? Now, when he went to visit Ayala's house, he knocked 3 times, and the first 2 times he was denied entry. And the third time, you know, based on him identifying himself, Obatalá sneaked through the peephole and said, "What are you doing here?" And Orumila told him, he said, "Hey, I'm here to help you or figure out how we can fix this issue, because if not, creation is about to stop." So Obatalá said, "I'd love to help you and I'd love to come out and start, you know, functioning again, but I'm in serious debt and these guys are going to kill me." And Orula said, "Well, what do you owe them? What are you into them for?" And he's like, "Yo, 3 bags of salt." Because the Odu of Obeyono, just like the Odu of Ochetura, was where salt was one of the original currencies, even before the cowrie shell. That's why if you notice, the word salary comes from sal, or, you know, salt, right? So Orula was like, "Yo, I got 3 bags of salt here, you know, but what's in it for me?" And Obatalá said, "If I'm the creator of destiny, you'll be the revealer of destiny. I'll only function through you, you know, and that way you could probably hold me honest and keep me away from my habits and things like that. And, you know, I'll never eat salt again, you know, out of respect." And that's another reason why salt is a taboo for Obatalá. So Obatalá went with Orumila to go pay off the debtors, or the deadees, however you term it, who was Iku, Arung, and Ofo, who was death, sickness, and loss. So when they broke him off with salt, that's why salt is such a great offering to avoid these negativities. Obatalá was able to start functioning again, and Orula became a Leriping, right, or the witness of destiny and the revealer of destiny, right? So when you look at this pataki, it says how when we're a headless body, we are thrusted into the house of Ayala, right? And when we're in there, we select our head blindly so that we don't pick the best one, the longest life, the most loving partner, best children, lots of money, possibly, you know, notability. it's to keep it honest, so that when we select it and we put it on our head or on our neck, we are taken in front of Olodumare. We kneel, right? We are identified our destiny. We are asked what we want to accomplish within it, what we offer as tribute. And Orunmila writes this down through a sign, right? Which is ultimately revealed at the hand of Ifa when Ori awakens at 7 days for girls or 9 days for boys or any time after that. But when we look at the correlation, Obatalá is literally the constructor of Ori. So when you look at, for example, when we're performing the sacrifice of a four-legged animal, specifically within the Lukumi tradition, there's a very common suyere that you're going to hear, which is Ori Malero, Ayala, Ori Malero, which means Ori, or possibly the ingredient of shea butter, will bring peace. And Ayala brings peace, or he facilitated that. Or any of the various ingredients that you can put at that point, the red palm oil, the salt, the honey, all of these were seen as the ingredients that were utilized to be able to construct Ori, and that's why they're indispensable when it comes to revealing or consecrating an Ile Ori icon as well. Like, for example, when we perform Iko Sedaye or Esentaye for a baby or a child or whatnot, in the Isheshe context, they are fed certain ingredients like the ones mentioned here to be able to activate and awaken Ori, because those were the same ingredients in heaven that were used divinely to construct it. So, Obatalá is the constructor of Ori, where Orunmila was the revealer of Ori, the witness of Ori, and ultimately the consecrator or facilitator of Ori. But Ori ultimately derives from Obatalá in his manifestation of Ayala, and all of this can be found in the Odu Ifá. Until this day, every time we, sacrifice a four-legged animal, or we're making offerings to Ori and then Ibori Eleda, like in the Lukumi context, in the Odu Otura Mele or Otura Wani, these are all verses that are still mentioned till this day. So being the constructor of Ori, or Obatalá, apart from the divine aspect of it, within the womb, our mother's womb, is the one who constructs everything. That's why when you begin to realize how key conception and pregnancy, all the way leading through birth, there's so much spiritual work that has to go into facilitating a successful human being and birth, and a healthy one. Where technically, once we conceive, where Obatalá is actually the facilitator of conception, being, more than 50% of the male specimen or the sperm that makes this happen, where Obatalá is seen as, the semen, and Odudua is seen as the sperm or the spirituality, which lives within it, right? That actually activates all of this. So, even then, from a biological standpoint, you could see the reenactment of this divine soap opera where Obatalá did most of the work, but he wasn't able to make it, and then Odudua came in at the end with, his precision and was able to fulfill it. Till this day, they still have to interact with each other on that divine level, and all of those concepts can be found in the Odu Ifá. But Obatalá, from the very beginning, whether it's through the male specimen or through the female one, with the ovary and the egg and things like that, where that actually became a symbol of his, in the Odu Ifá, right, where he became fertile and whatnot. And even if you look at the first animal that was able to lay eggs and things like that, maybe debatably the chameleon, but the hen, was the first animal on earth and whatnot. So, all of these themes are there from the very beginning. So when Obatalá is the facilitator of putting the baby ultimately into the sacred space that is the womb of the woman, right from that moment, he's constructing. You could say that Obatalá's house, or Ayala's house, is our mother's womb. That's heaven. We haven't arrived yet, so we're going through that process. And another thing is, when and all of this can be spoken about because it is ultimately public. Obatalá, when we look at the Odu Ifá, and when we actually sacrifice an animal, and we pull out something known as the ala, which is, I forgot the clinical term for it, but it's basically the sac that holds the stomach in place. And when we take it out and we look at it and we sing hala chirere, hala chirere, it's Obatalá. So from the very beginning, that one key piece of Obatalá, or the blanket or the cloth, it actually goes into our physiology, where it's actually the cloth that holds our stomach in place, or our mother's stomach in place, while we're being developed. So it's just huge correlations there. all the way to the time that we're born. You know, we're born, ideally, Ori is the first thing that exits, like Obatalá identified. We're given a white cloth and we're covered in it. You know, all of these things, you know, further this point. So that's really where Obatalá and Ori's relationship began, being that he was the constructor of it. Now, when you look at Odu's, like Irosofun, right? In the Odu of Irosofun, it speaks of when there was a competition that was occurring. And it was between Obatalá and Agayu. And they wanted to see, because these were the two elder Orishas, you know, at this juncture, who was going to be the owner of heads. And, you know, Agayu really wasn't a favorite, but he didn't want to lose to Obatalá either because he thought Obatalá was arrogant. So what he did was he put snakes around Obatalá's house, and Obatalá feared snakes. This is also in the Odu Baba Nameji, when the snake actually killed his pet rat or his pet bunny, depending. But it's actually one of the things that manifests Obatalá now. So Obatalá didn't want to leave his house. Shango and Eshu realized what was happening. They were able to sneak him out, possibly, or sneak Orula into the house. I don't recall. But in the Odu of Irosofun was revealed, where Ifá told him to perform sacrifice and to take it to the roof. And when he did, while he was doing that, Shango and Eshu took the palm wine from the Ebo as well and gave it to Agayu to leave him drunk at the foot of the palm tree. And Obatalá went hopping from roof to roof to roof all the way to Olodumare's palace, avoiding the snakes, to be crowned, because it said the first person to Olodumare's palace would be crowned the owner of heads, you know, or the Olori. And Agayu was very frustrated when he found out what had occurred, to the point where in the same Odu, Olodumare had to give him the domain of the atmosphere, so he wouldn't feel left out, you know, to the point where the atmosphere affects the heads more than the head itself. But it's another correlation between Obatalá and Ori, you know, where Obatalá, due to his obedience to Ifá and his good character and his ethics, was able to find the support of the other Orishas to be able to make it to Olodumare's palace, to be given one of the most prestigious positions in all of, you know, the mythology and cosmology of Ifá. So, you know, and literally in Irosofun is where Obatalá became the owner of heads. But also in the Odu of Irosofun, it also taps into Obatalá's toxicity, where, you know, due to his greed and his gambling habit, which may translate from Obeyono, he would steal the derechos of Santo from his god kids. And when the day of the Santo came, he actually had a mat with a hole under it full of spikes, so that they would go to get Santo done and they would fall in the hole and die instead. So when the latest person went to visit with Orumila, because they had heard rumors and Obatalá was stalling the process, they were told to perform sacrifice with Irosofun and drop it on top of the mat in front of Obatalá's door. So when the person knocked, you know, Obatalá answered, and, you know, they saw that the Ebo was in there rather than the person, and Obatalá, shocked to see the godchild surviving and having right to their money back or their ceremony, had a heart attack, died, and fell in the hole himself. So, you know, it speaks of the importance of balance, because in one Odu you can have a great position and a great victory, but in another one you can have a huge deprestige. So a lot of people ask me as well, Baba, you know, why is Obatalá seen as having the most children? Once again, why is he so exalted? Why is he so prevalent? You know, when you look at the Odu of Oyekun Pelekana, it speaks of when Obatalá and Shango would direct all of the Orisha ceremonies, and why they had the most children until Shung and Yemaya got in there and really, you know, made their case and, you know, forced them to recognize them as well. Where Oyekun Pelekana says that the Orishas that have the most following on earth are ultimately Obatalá, Shango, Yemaya, and Oshun. Maybe not particularly in that order, but it's recognized that Obatalá has the most following. You know, apart from Eshu as well, but everybody follows Eshu regardless of whether you're crowned or not. So there's that one. And then when you go to the Odu of Osarosun, was actually where Obatalá was the first revealer of destiny, and he would do it via the cowrie shells. And everything was going fine in the beginning, because like the Odu of Besa says and Osarosun says, there's a lot of versions where Obatalá was the first custodian of the cowrie shells, or the Erindi Logun. And he was the one who would perform divination to reveal destiny or identify somebody's most productive Orisha to be initiated into, right? Or their Odu. And with time, you know, people began realizing that no one would go to Obatalà's house without coming out a child of Obatalà. So Shango, being very prudent and observant, said something's not making sense here. And he actually spied on Obatalà and saw Obatalà manipulating the shell unethically to where everybody would come out a child of Obatalà. Now, what did this really mean? It meant that people were going to initiate into Obatalà. Obatalà was going to make more money, and Obatalà was going to, you know, have more food and just be the king of Orisha, you know. And Shango was very annoyed at this. And, you know, he semi-confronted Obatalà about it. Obatalà told him to kick rocks. And, you know, he went to Olodumare and he said, you know, we have this situation. And Olodumare said, I can't do too much because it's his. And he said, but what if I can find somebody to replace him and to do things ethically without bias? And he said, who do you have in mind? He said, my brother Orumila. And Shango brought Orula, who was living at the foot of the Ceiba tree, and the famous story in Okanabara and a couple others. And, you know, Orula was a very humble, meek young man, you know. And Olodumare looked at him and said, oh man, you know, you're comparing Obatalà's wisdom and tenure and age with this guy's youth and humility. I don't know if he's going to fit the bill. But when Olodumare started speaking to him, he realized that he was in front of not only a genius, but, you know, the wisest energy that had ever emanated from him, even though they hadn't met for some reason up until that point. So he called Obatalà in and he said, hey, I'm not accusing you of anything, but there's evidence showing that possibly, you know, you haven't been ethical. And Obatalà immediately got very defensive. He said, oh my God, you know, it was Shango, and Shango was there, and, you know, it was toxic. But Olodumare said, hey, rather than disgracing you, I'm going to do one better. I'm going to replace you with somebody who has no interest in getting crowned. So he looked at Orumila and said, the good news is you're going to replace your father Obatalà as the revealer of destiny with your sacred seeds of Iking. The bad news is nobody's ever going to crown you. And Orumila was like, to be honest with you, I really don't want to get crowned by nobody. You know, whoever wants to follow my path, they can do Itefa, but I'm not interested in all the, you know, the Orisha process. So Obatalà was very frustrated, and apart from that, you know, he had to share the shell with all of the Orishas, and that's why in the Lukumi tradition, all of the Orishas have a life divination with the shell, and not Orumila. So when we look at this story, it speaks of how Obatalà was the king of Orisha. He was the head diviner. He actually was the revealer of destiny at one point, the revealer of destiny being Ori. And, you know, he had it all, you know, but, you know, based on ethics and really just progression, there was no way things were going to be able to continue like that forever. He lost it, but the link was there, you know, to where besides being the constructor of Ori, he was the revealer of Ori at one point and everything that had to do with it. And it also exalts Orumila as well, because it shows how strong Orumila's connection to Ori is and connection to Obatalà as well, reiterating the point of Eyobe where it speaks so strongly of Obatalà's link to the Ifá practice and priesthood. You know, when you really look at it, apart even from the concept of Ori, Obatalà, without Obatalà and all of the things that have been revealed in literature and mythology and all of the scripture, without Obatalà, Ifá priesthood really couldn't function, because even though he's not the manipulator of Ifá, a lot of the things that he instituted from an auxiliary standpoint fell into Ifá's practice to the point where, you know, he just had to be recognized, you know, where Obatalà was a Babalao as well, like in the Odu Ifá. But a lot of the implements and processes that we went through were instituted by Obatalà, you know, principally Ori. And, you know, to bring it even more full circle, when you look at the Odu of Oturawani, or Otura Lakentu, it speaks of when Ori was becoming far too heavy for the body. And, you know, because of it, you know, like in the Odu of Odimei, it speaks of when all of the body parts started getting closer to Ori. Well, with that, they had to support Ori, right? And it was becoming very, very weighted. So they were having lack of mobility issues. You know, they needed a solution. So they went running to Obatalà. And Obatalà said, you know, this might be a little bit out of my scope. I mean, I made you, but you've kind of morphed a little bit. So you need to go visit Orumila, right? And when divination was performed, Oturawani was revealed, where within the Lukumi tradition, the first time Bibori was revealed, or an offering to Ori, where it was done in ceremonial fashion, beginning with the heads. Now, the Lukumi Ibori focuses more on the joints, where the Sheshe one focuses more on the points, as I like to say, where it really radicates around the three positions of Ori, Orinu, and Imponring, right? Where, you know, you could incorporate those in the Lukumi head rogation as well, but it's more focused on the joints because it says the spiritualities of the joints couldn't tolerate Ori's weight anymore. So appeasement was given to all of them, where certain things were placed on the various joints of the body. And because of it, they were spiritually revitalized to be able to handle all that Ori had to offer. Because as it spiritually grew, the body had to be reinforced spiritually as well to be able to handle it. So when you look at that concept as well, Ori seeking Obatalá for that guidance and ultimately confirming it with Orumila. But apart from that, the things that Ori likes are very similar to what Obatalá utilizes frequently. So whether it's shea butter or Ori, that's all Obatalá. Cacaria or Efung, or the calcified rock, which basically represents Obatalá's position in nature all day long. The coconut, you know, even though it's not necessarily used as a divination method in Isheshe, even though I have seen it done, you know, the white part has always been identified with Obatalá, and you know, the fat content and the cooling aspect that it has is very compatible with Ori, to the point where Otrupo Mei says that Ori is nothing more than two coconuts, you know, the two hemispheres of the brain and whatnot. And, you know, just once again reiterating the relationship between Obatalá and Ori, to the point where they even consume the same things. Even though Ori is much more eclectic than Obatalá, where Obatalá is a little more stricter with what he's able to consume and whatnot, Ori, for the most part, you're not going to see many head rogations that happen without an obiabata. And even the obi that ideally is offered to Ori is obi afing, which is the white obi, and afing makes reference to albino, and the people with albinism are supported and blessed by Obatalá, being that, you know, in some versions he was an albino, like the Odu Oturamei and Osamei and a couple other ones speak of. So whether it's the consecration, whether it's the appeasement, I mean, even when you do an ibori, you're supposed to be wearing all white. Ideally, there's a white cloth that's involved. It just reeks of Obatalá. So based on this correlation, we thought this video would be very eye-opening and very confirmational for everyone that's kind of noticed, you know, why is Obatalá so linked to Ori? When we go all the way back to its consecration, its creation, its inception, its all of its processes, Obatalá was there, even reiterating it within us, going all the way back to when we were conceived and ultimately born, to where Obatalá is seen as the father Orisha. And the reason being is because he provided us all the head that sits above our shoulders.
Okay.
Whoa.
Yeah, man. That was a good one.
Thank you.
Man, you were rolling through that one.
Yeah, it's a lot of information to recollect, and you know, it's a really enjoyable topic. I mean, Obatalá is they're all great. All of the Orishas represent something special to me. I don't really have a favorite, but I will say that Obatalá, for me, especially for anybody that knows my Odu Ifá Suka, is a huge cornerstone. Where Obatalá, you know, literally, you know, blessed the person and covered him in the white cloth. So for me, he's always been a very important Orisha, and one that I've resolved a lot of things with. And the concept of Ori has always fascinated me, especially when, you know, from the time I learned how to do the head rogation for my godfather, all the way through my Isheshe apprenticeship, to be able to provide Ori in a fully Isheshe context, like seeing the correlations between both traditions and how much Obatalá plays a role there, where he's preeminent along with Orumila. It's the most important concept within our faith, ultimately. Like, Ori is the whole religion. Everything we do is to be able to appease Ori in our destiny. So the Orishas, which Obatalá was Orishanla, which means the first defender of Ori, arrived. All they do is defend and help repair Ori. So when you go for a reading and it comes out you have to give an apple to Shango, the reason you have to give an apple to Shango is to empower him to be able to defend Ori or realign Ori in a way to be able to get to your destiny in a much more productive fashion. That's really it. That's the whole religion.
Okay. Well, guess what?
Oh, man.
Yeah. Time to show some love. Now, guys, remember, you can join our membership program. It's real simple. Click on that button directly under the video. Takes you to our membership platform. We had 3 separate tiers. Each tier is offering its own set of perks. So today, I think we're going to show some love to the VIPs.
Oh man, VIPs.
VIPs, you guys are the backbone. All right, here we go. We got Dominic Santiago.
Dominic, blessings.
We got Rav Toforum.
Thank you.
We got Raw Corn. Okay.
VIPs.
We got DeShady.
Thank you.
Marco 23.
All right, blessings.
Desert Woman.
All right, right on.
40 Junior.
Righteous.
Queen Liquid Waters.
We appreciate you.
Miss Lulu Lights.
Okay, thank you, Lulu.
Holy GTV.
Bless. Oh, Boru.
And let's go with Trinity. We all know Trinity.
All blessings, may how, and thank you to all the VIP members. If you know anybody that could benefit from the program, be sure to let them know about it. You know, constantly coming out with new material and whatnot for you guys, providing that value. I think we actually have a live after this, whenever this was recorded. So definitely get in there to have those personal interactions, because when we go live for everybody, super chats tend to affect things. So we want to make sure we address your questions, and in the VIP lives, we're definitely going to get to all of them, right? So BotanicaCandlesandMore.com is up and running for all your spiritual service and product needs. We do ship. If you can't catch us here on YouTube, be sure to listen to us on all the major platforms like Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple, etc. A big thank you from all of us here at Botanica Candles and More and Our Roots podcast. Be sure to subscribe, family. And until next time, never forget to see the light.
Baba Joseph showed the path today. Baba knows the way, we follow the signs. He walks with the Orisha through sacred lines. He speaks with the ancients, he honors the drum. He carries the wisdom where we all come from.